we are going to be continuing with our top 10 greatest of all time in a given position series, and today's position is going to be running back. But before we get into the video, I wanted to take a second to ask you to please subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications. Really helps us out. If you're a fan of the NFL, you'll love this channel. We release multiple NFL-related videos every Tuesday and Friday all year long. Now, let's get back to the video. At number 10, I have Christian McCaffrey, and while many people might question him already being in a top 10 list, given he's only 28 years old and has had a couple of injury-riddled seasons already in his career, I still put Christian McCaffrey this high on the list because running backs often do have quite short NFL careers, and Christian McCaffrey has been, in my opinion, the best running back of the past decade, and it's tough to leave the best running back of a decade off a top 10 list. And if you look at Christian McCaffrey's stats, he is 5th all-time in terms of scrimmage yards per game, and he's behind two players that are 1 and 2 on this list, along with two players that the sum total of their games is still significantly less than Christian McCaffrey's total games played thus far in his career. And given Christian McCaffrey has really changed the way that the running back position is played at the NFL level, being both an extremely competent runner of the football as well as receiver of the football, and a guy who has a massive nose for the end zone, either through the air or on the ground, he, in my opinion, could be well above 10 by the time his career is all said and done. And so I'm not going to knock his short tenure in the NFL to have him any lower than 10th on this list. At number 9, we have Marcus Allen. And while many people know the name Marcus Allen, I don't think many people know the type of running back that Marcus Allen was. Marcus Allen only had 3 seasons in the NFL in which he accrued more than 1,000 rushing yards. And so you might ask, well, then how is he in the top 10? Well, I'll start by saying he's number 9, so he's lower in the top 10. But there are 2 primary reasons that he is so high in terms of his overall ranking. The first is the fact that this guy had a nose for the end zone. He is number 3 all-time in terms of all-time NFL touchdowns from scrimmage, either rushing or receiving. The only guys higher than him are going to be on this list to come, and the next 4 guys after him are all also on this top 10 list. And so it really goes to show how good this guy was at finding the end zone. As well, Marcus Allen played for a long-ass time in the NFL, still accruing well over 12,000 rushing yards throughout his time in the NFL, while also being a decent receiving option at the running back position. And so the combination of his ability to accrue stats, as well as his ability to have a nose for the end zone, is what puts him at number 9 on our top 10 list. At number 8 on our list, we have Eric Dickerson, a star that shone as bright as just about anybody else on this list, but did not have anywhere close to the same effective longevity as many other players who are later on this list. Eric Dickerson, to this day, holds the record for the most rushing yards in a single season with 2,105 rushing yards in only his second season in the NFL, when it was still only a 16-game regular season. Beyond that, in 3 of his first 4 seasons in the NFL, he had over 1,800 rushing yards. Let's be clear, in modern day NFL since 2000, it is rare you have any running backs over 1,800 yards in a single season, and Dickerson did it in 3 of his first 4 seasons. That's crazy. But after these 4 seasons, Dickerson was traded away from the Rams to the Colts, where he was still quite an effective running back, but nowhere close to the level that he was with the Rams, and with some stops in some other places before the end of his career. Eric Dickerson kind of ended up with a little bit of a whimper to his career, but Eric Dickerson was so good at the beginning of his career that he has to be in the top 10 all-time running backs list at number 8. At number 7 on this list, we have Adrian Peterson, one of the best running backs of recent history, and one of the few running backs that many people watching this video would definitely have seen during their lifetime. Adrian Peterson was one of the most ridiculous runners of the football. Yeah, he wasn't a great receiver, but it didn't matter. Adrian Peterson made the Vikings worth watching and made the Vikings a competitive team throughout his time in Minnesota. Yes, he had tenures with Detroit and Washington and Seattle and New Orleans and whoever the hell else he played for, but he is known for his time with the Vikings. He had a 2,000-yard season with the Vikings. He went to an NFC championship game with the Vikings with a 40-year-old Brett Favre as his quarterback. He had guys like Tavares Jackson, Christian Ponder, and an ancient Brett Favre as his quarterbacks, and still made the Minnesota Vikings one of the best teams in the NFL to watch and one of the hardest teams to play against during his time with the Vikings. That's why this guy goes down at number 7 on our all-time running backs list. And he might be even higher if he didn't lose so much of his prime to suspensions and injury that he doesn't have as many amazing seasons as some other guys on these lists. At number 6, we have the all-time NFL leading rusher, Emmitt Smith. And many people might question why I have the all-time NFL leader in rushing yards all the way down at number 6. And there's 2 reasons for that. The first is that I don't put too much stock in a running back's longevity in order to determine how good they were as a player. Running backs historically have very short careers. They shine bright, but they shine in short spurts. And so yes, Emmitt Smith was able to shine for a lot longer a period, but I don't think as brightly as the remaining guys on this list. As well, Emmitt Smith had one of the best supporting packages of anybody on this list. He had one of the best offensive lines that he was able to run behind during those 90s Cowboys teams. As well, he had Troy Aikman throwing the ball to Michael Irvin, which prevented teams from being able to stack the box against Emmitt Smith, because if they did, the Cowboys could beat them in other ways. And so while Emmitt Smith is still an all-time great running back, and I don't take anything away from him in terms of his status as that, he's still number 6 on my list because I do believe there are 5 running backs that were better than him as a running back, even though their overall productivity throughout the duration of their career might not be as high as Smith's. At number 5, I have Marshall Faulk, who, much like Emmitt Smith, had a massive amount of help during the most successful part of his career. When Marshall Faulk was with the St. Louis Rams, he had Kurt Warner, Isaac Bruce, Torrey Holt, was running behind guys like Orlando Pace. This team was known as the greatest show on turf for a reason, and one of the greatest offenses in NFL history for a reason. And while Marshall Faulk was definitely a part of that reason, this offense still would have been great if anybody else was playing running back. The reason I still put Marshall Faulk all the way up here at number 5 was because Marshall Faulk was one of the first running backs who truly changed the way that running backs play. He is a modern day running back who played 20 odd years ago. He is a receiving threat as well as a running threat. He is only the second running back in NFL history to have 1,000 rushing yard season and 1,000 receiving yard season in the same season. I mean, come on. Think about that. 1,000 rushing yards is the barometer for a really good rushing season. And 1,000 receiving yards is the barometer for a really good receiving season. If you have a player that does either of those 2 things, you are ecstatic with that player's production. Marshall Faulk did both of those in the same season. That shows how effective he is. There's only 3 running backs in history to do that. And one of those has already been on this list, that being Christian McCaffrey at number 10. And so because of how Marshall Faulk is so influential for the modern running back and the modern pass-catching running back, I put him up here at number 5 on this list. At number 4, we have LaDainian Tomlinson. And when I was first getting into football, LaDainian Tomlinson was dominating the NFL in the mid-2000s. The Chargers team had some good players on it. They did have a good version of Drew Brees for a year or 2, and Phillip Rivers was a pretty good quarterback for them as well. But let's be clear, the Chargers offense ran through LT. LT still to this day holds the single season record for most touchdowns in a season with 28 touchdowns in a season. Think about having 28 touchdowns in a season from your running back at a 16-game NFL regular season. That's a free win in fantasy. You win every fantasy season if you got LaDainian Tomlinson on your team. Plus the fact that he wasn't just a touchdown guy. This guy was running for massive yards. He wasn't the fastest guy on the field. He wasn't the strongest guy on this field. But he could cut you and juke you into the ground. He knew how to beat you, and he could just run all day on you. LaDainian Tomlinson is the most special running back I can personally remember watching in my lifetime, and he belongs at number 4 on this list for how effective he was and for how long he was effective. Yes, there's no Super Bowls, but it's running back. The Super Bowls don't matter as much for running backs. It's the productivity, and LT has it. At number 3, we have Walter Payton, and this is where the decision gets really hard. To me, the top 3 running backs of all time is a really easy list. The order of them, very difficult. And I would accept the argument of any of these next 3 guys in any of the 1, 2, or 3 position. But I decided to put Walter Payton at 3. For Walter Payton, there's almost nothing this guy didn't do. In the 80s Bears teams, Walter Payton was the go-to guy on offense. The Bears have never had a 4,000-yard passer in the history of their franchise, which goes to show you how important Walter Payton was for that team's offense to thrive alongside their excellent defense. On top of that, Walter Payton has longevity. He played 190 games at running back in the NFL and had over 16,000 rushing yards during his career, while also putting up some receiving yards. In terms of his total yards per game from scrimmage, Walter Payton averaged over 110 yards per game from scrimmage while playing 190 games in the NFL. That is over 12 full seasons in the NFL that Walter Payton played while still being one of the most productive players in the NFL throughout every one of those games. And so no matter what metric you look at, Walter Payton is great. Did he win? Yes. Did he put up total stats? Yes. Did he have short stints of excellence? Yes. Did he consistently put up great numbers? Yes. No matter what you look at, Walter Payton did it, which is why he is top 3 and number 3 on our list. At number 2, we have Jim Brown, and I look at Jim Brown as the anti-Emmitt Smith. Jim Brown is one of the brightest stars to ever burn at the running back position, but he only played 118 games in the NFL. To put that in perspective, if Christian McCaffrey were to play 2 more full seasons in the NFL, he would have more games played than Jim Brown, in spite McCaffrey's lengthy injury history and him only being 28 years old. But when Jim Brown played, there was almost nobody who can compete in terms of his level of productivity. He has over 125 yards from scrimmage per game of his 118 games played. That is more than 5 yards more than any other player in NFL history. Beyond that, Brown went on to win 3 MVP awards during his NFL history. Other guys who have won 3 MVP awards: Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers, Johnny Unitas, Brett Favre. That's the list. There will always be questions about how good Jim Brown would have been in terms of the all-time leaderboards had he played for longer. But the fact that he had over 125 yards per game from scrimmage and over 100 yards rushing per game throughout the entirety of his career should show you how dominant Jim Brown was and why he's number 2 on this list. And at number 1, I got Barry Sanders. And if you ask Barry Sanders' dad, he would not agree with my list. He would go Jim Brown 1, Walter Payton 2, his own son 3. But I'm going to give his son a little bit more credit than he does. And it's only partially because I'm a Lions fan. What makes Barry Sanders so good is he's a combination of Jim Brown and Walter Payton. He played a little bit longer than Jim Brown, in spite retiring very early when he was still one of the most effective running backs in the game. He ran for a 2,000-yard season just 1 year before retirement and ran for over 1,400 yards in his final season before shock retiring right before training camp in the 2000 season. In terms of his rushing total, had he had 31 more rushing yards in his career, he would have averaged 100 rushing yards per game, and he still averaged almost 119 yards per game from scrimmage throughout the entirety of his career, which should show you how effective a running back he was throughout the entirety of his career, especially seeing as he never had a drop-off. His final 2 seasons were 2,000 yards rushing and 1,400 yards rushing. That's insane. But I think the thing that puts Barry Sanders over the top for me as the number 1 guy is the fact that he played for a frankly putrid Lions team outside of him. And yes, the 90s era of Lions is probably the greatest era of Lions outside of the last year? But that was almost entirely because of Barry Sanders' greatness. They did not have a quarterback. They did not have a great defense, though they had some pieces there. They did not have a great offensive line. They didn't have any true all-time greats outside of Barry Sanders playing for them during the 90s. In spite of that, they were still a very effective team and were able to even go to an NFC Championship game where they lost to the objectively amazing Washington Redacteds. And the final thing that puts Barry Sanders over the top for me is just the excitingness of watching him run. I understand that maybe I shouldn't be counting that in terms of the greatest all-time running backs, but hey, I'm biased. Sue me. If you ever want to see true greatness in action, go watch videos of Barry Sanders running the football. The way he's able to make guys miss make great players look silly, break tackles, juke guys out of their socks. These are things that no other player in NFL history can do. These were things that video game characters cannot do. Barry Sanders was a different level. He's another world compared to everybody else. And yes, in my opinion, he belongs at number 1 on this list. But that's it for my top 10 greatest running backs of all time. If you enjoyed this list, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like down below and let me know in the comments what you'd like to see more of. Either way, I'll see you all next time. Peace!